I am Gregory Hallows, and this is Preserve Halloween Podcast. So for this week's podcast, I'm going to keep on my, obsession with holidays and learning about them, especially those that are happening here in February. The next one I wanted to bring up because of the date and the time frame. It's called Parentalia. Parentalia is a Roman religious festival held in honor of the dead and is a celebration of the rights of deceased family members. And this was later extended to include just the dead in general. The Parentalia was, unlike many other Roman celebrations, often a time of quiet personal reflection rather than the boisterous debauchery and merrymaking that many Roman festivals usually included. Families gathered together, visited the ancestral tombs of their forebears, and offered libations to the dead, and they sometimes offered bread and wine. This was left for the deceased kinfolk, and if the family itself had a deity of the household, a small sacrifice would be made to them as well. During this 7-day festival, or 8 or 9, depending on the research you find, because I found all 3, life would pause while the city observed the rites of remembrance for the ancestors. Each family's ceremonials were held in private, and they gathered to keep memories of their dearly departed alive. And generally, the Parentalia began on the 13th of February, when, according to the calendar of Philocalus, a Vestal Virgin performed the Virgo Vesta Parenta, which is the opening rituals for the dead. This association with death tainted the period of Parentalia. Basically, it meant there was no incense for altars, no fires for hearths, and according to Ovid, priests barred the doors of the temples, no marriages were performed, even the city political life was affected. Magistrates would take their official togas off, and the court was closed. So this was a really big deal. While Roman citizens retired behind closed doors to celebrate the rights of the dead amongst their own family, it was believed that the dead arose and wandered among the living. However, even though they were dead, they still needed to eat. So Roman citizens were instructed to bring offerings to the tombs of their dead ancestors, which consisted of at least an arrangement of wreaths, a sprinkling of grain, and a bit of salt, and bread soaked in wine and violets scattered about. So, basically just something that they could snack on and look pretty. Additional offerings were permitted, however, the dead were appeased with just those things mentioned above. I don't know how they figured that out, but I would love to find that research where they found out the dead were appeased by grain and a bit of salt and bread soaked in wine. That's a pretty simple menu. Anyway, these simple offerings to the dead were perhaps introduced into Latium by Aeneas, who poured wine and scattered violet flowers on Anchises' tomb. So I just answered my own question, I guess. So basically, families would leave gifts. Ovid describes how relatives left offerings lying on a shard in mid-street or at the tombs of the departed. They gathered to build hearths and provide prayers and ritual words, and leave sprinkled corn and a thrifty grain of salt. So there you go again. Archaeological evidence from Pompeii suggests these visits to the graveyard could be quite pleasant affairs. Many tombs were equipped with a seating area, and they were set within a peaceful garden. Why not make it, a decent time? Some of the more elaborate, according to Virginia Campbell, even had private dining rooms and cooking facilities. So during the Parentalia, families did not just visit the grave and leave a bunch of flowers. They would stick around, they would prepare meals, and they would eat with their, departed, deceased family members. Even those who did not have a lot of money would, take a picnic. So this was a very widespread celebration. The idea behind sharing the meal with your family was to connect you with your ancestors. By spending time at graves and dining with the dead, relatives were remembering and honoring those who went before them. By sharing a meal and leaving behind a carefully crafted floral garland of violets or similar flowers, the family would ensure that their ancestral dead continued to watch over them and aid in their endeavors. So, it's one of those things where you want to make sure that your family is watching over you. So I guess you bribe them. Anyway, I'm joking about that. But this act is not something that's not still continued. There are a lot of cultures and people that continue to do this to today. So on the final day of Parentalia, a public feast called the Feralia was held. Feralia was an ancient Roman public festival celebrating the manes, which are the Roman spirits of the dead, and particularly the souls of deceased individuals. And this fell on February 21st, as recorded by Ovid in Book 2 of his Fasti. He describes a strange rite dedicated to Tacita, the goddess of the dead, which was performed on the Feralia by an old woman surrounded by young girls. And this is a quote from this book. 3 fingers tuck 3 incense lumps under a door, where a tiny mouse built a hidden path. The hag then fastens enchanted cords with dark lead, and rolls 7 beans inside her mouth. And she roasts on the fire the sewn head of the sprat, smeared in pitch and spitted with a bronze rod. She also drops in wine. What remains of the wine she or her friends drink, although she drinks more. We have tied hostile tongues in our enemies' mouths, the hag shouts. The images of binding, sealing, and blocking suggest a ritual of banishing and removing harm. All of this, plus the involvement of the silent goddess of death, suggests that Feralia was a rite to guide the dead back to their proper place and make sure that they stayed there. According to Mary Beard, in Religions of Rome, the Romans regarded their dead as intermediaries between themselves and gods. The petitions for good fortune at the graveside certainly endorsed this view. However, Ovid's descriptions of the hag's rites at the Feralia jars this cozy image of families who are only divided by the grave. I guess to understand this contradiction, it's necessary to look at the Romans' general attitude to death and the deceased. So, in ancient Rome, when a person died, the rites and rituals surrounding the departed were not to help them on their way to the afterlife, but basically to keep them away from the living. Basically what we know, when you die, you pollute that around you. After a funeral, and that's literally and figuratively. So after a funeral, a family was considered impure until they had ritually cleansed both themselves and their homes. This may be the reason why Romans could rationalize the necessity of disposing of corpses hygienically. But even though their remains were safely separated from the living, Romans never forgot their ancestors. They honored them for their own sake, but they also considered them to be needing to be pacified. Animas placate patterns, warned Ovid. This was the true reason behind Parentalia. Ovid, he went on to describe the consequences if you forget the dead. There's a story that once during a time of war, the Parentalias was not honored, and this was not a good thing. Ovid said the ancestors left their tombs in night's silent hour and wailed. The city streets and broad grassland howled, they say, with a hollow throng of shapeless souls. I do not wish to hear that noise. This invasion of Rome by the shades of the departed brought the Romans sharply to their senses. They realized, we messed up. We need to remember the dead. They quickly remembered their duties, and they pacified their deceased loved ones with the aforementioned gifts and attention. This satisfied their ancestors, and they returned to their graves, and once again they were at peace. I found a quote from a blogger named Camilla Laurentine, and she described how her family today still celebrates Parentalia each year. She said, quote, "Long before my spiritual practice fell comfortably into the lines of a modern Roman practice, I held family and my ancestors in high esteem. Friends found this curious for a long time, and many probably still do, but it is what it is. Now I have the alignment of my religious practice to help cement those I've come from as spiritually important. This is a very meaningful and important relationship to me. This upcoming week is going to be busy getting our dining room cleaned, swept, and organized for this festival, because you tidy up for honored guests. We will decorate the table, which is being turned into a place of offering for every meal. So that is her thoughts on Parentalia. There are many other, like I said, religions and cultures that celebrate the dead. There's Day of the Dead. There's Japanese rituals. There's tons of things ongoing, and will continue to be something that's important. Honoring your family, honoring your deceased is not something that's new or something that's ever going to go away. I really enjoyed researching this Parentalia. I do want to look up more. I did a pretty quick dive into it, and I'm going to look up some books and get into it more, because I know there's got to be much more detail in after what I read. So, like I said, this whole 6 Degrees of Samhain, my personal journey into researching as many holidays and rituals and holy days that I can find has been a blast for me. So, thanks for listening. As always, preserve Halloween.